You're all here this afternoon to work through with me on understanding transition statements to support children as they transition into school. Before we go any further, though, I do want to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands on which we meet today. My colleagues Virginia and Kelly and we're joining you from beautiful Yagara and Turrbal land here on the beautiful Maiwar in Brisbane. We pay our respects to elders and their descendants who continue their cultural and spiritual connections to country. And we extend that respect to Aboriginal people and Torres Strait Islander people here today. I did see there was a contingent from Tagai College up at Thursday Island, and it's wonderful to have everybody join us where possible. So we thank them for taking the time and coming in and being with us this afternoon. My name is Janice McDermott. I am one of the Principal Project Officers for Kindergarten here at QCAA. My colleagues Stacey and Kelly and I are busily supporting people at the moment in this time of transition statements. And the best way to reach us is through our email inbox at QKLG. One of us is monitoring that very closely, and we can get back to you in a very efficient manner if you do need any support. I will pop these contact details up again at the end of the session for you to be able to take away. But I want to get to our purpose today, our goal. We're focusing on transition statements and how information in a transition statement can support children's transition and continuity of learning as they start prep. I'm just going to pause and give you a quiet moment to read the success criteria of how we're going to try and achieve that together today. So here's our outline for this afternoon as we try and work towards that goal. We're going to really consider what transition and continuity of learning means to us, and then tie that into how information in a transition statement can support transition and continuity of learning, what that information is and how we might use it. We will start with that broader idea and considering what transition and continuity of learning mean to us. Now, transition and continuity of learning are often considered one in the same. We often use them in the same sentence in the same way. So we're just going to take some time to have a think about how they differ and then what that means for our practice. Now, Bob Perry and Sue Dockett's long-standing resource, the Continuity of Learning, a resource to support effective transition to school and school-aged care, asks us to really consider transition to school as that point where children experience great change between two different learning environments, their prior to school environment and their new school environment. And it's how transition practices aim to bridge those differences and support children experience shared approaches to teaching and learning, build their sense of belonging and engagement in a new learning environment. And Dockett and Perry build on that idea of transition. And they suggest that continuity of learning is a really important part of that transition process. And that continuity of learning includes ways of building those shared understandings of curriculum, of pedagogy and practice, and also of those strategies and supports across different settings to effectively support the individual learners coming into school. Now, along with that long-standing continuity resource of Dockett and Perry's, the QKLG provides advice to kindergarten teachers and educators about practices supporting each child's transition and continuity of learning into prep. Two of those key elements are collaborating with partners and sharing information. We're going to focus on how transition statements can support through the sharing of information, that transition and continuity of learning. We know that not only kindergarten teachers, but you as schools and prep teachers are engaging in a range of practices and employing a range of strategies to support that transition to school. But our focus today is coming in and thinking about how does a transition statement help us in that space. So just to get a little bit of an idea of when we're thinking about how information in a transition statement can support, think for a moment about what is it that we focus on when planning to be ready for the learner coming to you. Now, this might look different depending on your sector as well, because we know that each sector has their own guidance and advice on planning for and supporting children's transition. So I just want to pause for a moment, let you have a think about what are the things that you value, that you find important when you're planning to be ready for those learners coming to you. Please do feel free to use the chat box if you're unable to access Menti. Wonderful. So really looking to understand and have that understanding and knowledge of children and their families as they're coming through. Relationships, understanding that belonging and connection through relationships. That idea of supporting each learner that's coming through, that may be through adjustments for children with disability, maybe strategies that can support each individual learner come in and feel that sense of belonging. Social emotional capability. Beautiful. Particularly at that start of the year, that separation from parents and connecting with new people, that real trust and security sense for children. And I love that there's been multiple reference there to actually understanding children's strengths, their capabilities, as a really important part of being able to make decisions about learning, pedagogy and practice for those individuals. Wonderful. And those strategies. So if we think about grouping those very specific ideas into broader themes, we can see that getting ready for learners starting prep, we're thinking about how we're building relationships and understanding children and the families so that we can take understandings about children's strengths, about their interests, about their learning, and make decisions about those effective learning environments, teaching and learning approaches, and then strategies to support individual learners. Now, I want you to hold those four key themes in mind as we explore information that you'll find in a transition statement. We're going to relate that back to these themes and how we might use that information to plan for and be ready for learners in those areas. So what we're going to tackle next is the information in a transition statement. So transition statements provide really valuable information about a child's learning and development. And they support schools consider what they can plan for and prepare to be ready for that child. What we're going to do is deepen our understanding of the QKLG learning that is described in a transition statement and what are some of those requirements for kindergarten so that you understand the context of them creating these statements. Now, kindergarten services are required under their kindergarten funding to create their transition statements in the QCAA portal application, and they're required to submit those statements in the portal and share them with families in November. And then if they have parent carer permission, they can then share those statements on with schools. So all that consent and the responsibility for consent sits with the kindergarten. They will enter all that information into the app and maintain those records. Now, there may be occasions when kindergarten services do not use the app. If parents and carers do not provide consent to use the application, then kindergarten services won't be able to do that. They will need to use an alternative word template that we provide. Now, there are also cases where children have early entry to school and don't meet the eligible kindergarten age. They don't sit within the framework or parameters to use the portal, and that's where a alternative word template is used as well. So in those instances, you won't be able to find those transition statements on the portal. That will be conversations with families around their comfort of sharing and providing you with that alternative word template. Now, the information in a transition statement includes information on the parent, child, and carer perspectives, the teacher perspectives on the child as a learner, QKLG learning and development, and suggestions to support continuity of learning. So there's some really key elements of what you will pick up in those transition statements. We're going to have a look at how that looks now in the updated transition statement and where you'll find key pieces of information that you may be looking for. So the transition statements are now approximately 3 pages, consisting of a cover page and then 2 pages on children's learning and development. We've made some changes to the layout and to the organisation of that content as well. So you'll see things like headings used throughout to help highlight where information can be found. So we're going to take some time to become familiar with that structure. And if you would like to, you can follow along on that example transition statement that was emailed out to participants yesterday, because the one on screen I'm sure will be very difficult for you to read for the sizing. So you can follow along on that copy that you were sent. So this section on the cover page shares information about the child, the kindergarten and the program details. It has information such as the enrolled days, and those enrolled days are specific to the kindergarten funded hours. So in a long daycare setting, some children might attend that long daycare for 5 days a week, but they only are funded for 2 to 3 of those. So the learning sits around those funded days in a transition statement. What this information does is support schools to understand the child's access and participation in the kindergarten program. It also has the contact details for the kindergarten service in case parents do give permission for a conversation or for discussion about that content. And this is where you'll find the parent-carer consent. There's a statement in here that lets you know whether the parent or carer has provided or has not provided consent for the information in the transition statement to be discussed. There was an update around consent and greater specificity around indicating who has the right to discuss that information. So you'll see in that statement now that the people who have that right to discuss the child's information are the kindergarten teacher, the prep teacher, and school leaders with that specific responsibility for transition to prep. Working through the statement, the next part on the cover page that you'll come to are the parent, carer and child perspectives. And this is where they have the opportunity to express and provide information about what they would like the school and the prep teacher to know about them in relation to that transition process. So that was one of the comments right at the very start of our session today about getting to know those parent and child perspectives. And this is one way that you are able to do that through the information that parents and carers provide in this part of a transition statement. Following the parent carer perspectives are the teacher's perspectives, and this is where the kindergarten teacher gets the chance to describe the child as a learner in the kindergarten environment. It may include information about their strengths and interests, which I noticed people were interested in understanding and seeing through our comments earlier, but also about their dispositions, achievements, and progress. So together, these two sections on the perspectives provide a more holistic sense of the child with which we can view learning and development. And it was strongly advocated through our consultation with primary schools and with parent associations that it was important to position these at the front so you have that lens and the view of a whole child before jumping into those individual capabilities and characteristics. Learning and development are the last areas that are described in our transition statement. Each area is differentiated by colour, so a little bit like learning areas in an Australian curriculum. I do want to take some time to give you a bit of an overview of what learning is described in each learning and development area, really help to draw some of those curriculum connections to prep and deepen that understanding of how that information might be able to support teaching and learning decisions that you make, those starting points for learning for children coming into prep. So the QKLG has 5 learning and development areas. It is based on the EYLF version 2.0. Within those 5 learning and development areas, learning is broken down into key foci, significant learnings, and then a continua of observable learnings. So we'll talk mostly about those key foci today and the observable learnings, as that's what you will see directly described in a transition statement. You'll have a statement on the key focus, followed by capabilities that have been observed in those learnings on the continua. So let's become familiar with those key foci to start with. So in identity, here are the 3 key foci for that learning and development area. What you will see is that learning in this area supports children to feel that sense of trust and security with others, which was commented at the start again about being really important to understand. They're learning about themselves as learners and becoming increasingly more independent and resilient as learners. And when you're thinking through that, you might automatically be starting to make some connections to learning in health and physical education, but also when integrating personal and social general capabilities around self-awareness, self-management, and a sense of self in the world. In our next area, in connectedness, children are really developing a sense of connectedness to their world through building and sustaining positive relationships, learning about diverse cultural experiences of others, and also building their awareness of ways to care for the environment. And again, some really foundational learning here supporting health and physical education and personal and social capabilities in interacting respectfully with others, as well as those opportunities in connecting to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander histories and cultures. Wellbeing learning supports children to recognise and manage their feelings and their emotions, build awareness of ways they can be healthy and safe, and also build their physical strength, coordination, and control. Thinking again about those connections into prep learning, strong links to health and physical educations about making healthy and safe choices, movement and physical activity. Active learning supports children becoming more confident and involved learners as they really develop their enthusiasm and desire for learning, build on those skills to actively participate in and organise their learning, but explore ways technologies can support their learning and communication as well. And so we can see some of those connections into prep coming through around our digital literacy and engaging with technologies to investigate, to research, to create, and to communicate. Now, communicating learning and development is supporting children become effective communicators. And you see that through these three key foci of developing communication and language skills to express their ideas and feelings and connect with others, exploring mathematical language and ideas in everyday situations, and that engagement with text to understand and respond to world around them in meaningful ways. So there's some really instantly recognisable connections to English and to mathematics, but also to literacy and numeracy. Now, I talked earlier about those finer grain observable learnings in relation to key foci that are what you will see described as children's demonstrated capabilities. I just wanted to share an example with you from wellbeing and that key focus of building increasing autonomy and resilience. What we can see here is across the phases of the continua, those really key observable capabilities in responding to visuals or questions to identify feelings, in those familiar situations where they feel comfort and belonging with explicit support. They may be sitting in their exploring phase where they're recognizing feelings in those familiar situations with occasional support. Or it could be that at that point in time, they are more like the extending phase where they're recognizing and expressing feelings in new situations with only occasional prompting. So those capabilities sit within the framework of situation and support. There is no expectation in kindergarten that there's a standard children must meet by the end of kindergarten. Learning is seen as a journey and the building of capabilities, and that's reflected in our continua. So wellbeing is where some of that social emotional learning you identified earlier as being important will be seen and will be understood. So I wanted to show you quickly how that's a direct link to what our kindergarten teachers are planning for and assessing. And that's what they're asked to make judgments on when they go to create a transition statement in the application. So this is what it looks like for kindergarten teachers in the application. That three-phase continua is represented in the application, and teachers will use their evidence from their assessment to make a judgment at that point in time about which phase the child's learning is more like. What are those capabilities they have seen children demonstrate? They select that and they do that for each of the observable learnings they're asked to in the application. And then what the application does is generate those into statements about observable learnings. Like the example we see here for Anya, we can see that judgment around how the child is recognising and expressing feelings has been converted into that sentence that first sentence in well-being, where Anya's displaying increasing autonomy and resilience by responding to visuals or questions to identify her feelings. Now, that's that broad statement about observed capability, but we know more information is helpful, as somebody mentioned before, not just to read between the lines, but to be able to take that information and go, what does that look like for that child? So there is an additional section in transition statements this year that's called suggestions to support continuity of learning. And what that does is allow teachers to provide more context for that judgment. So you will see that here in this example that's been highlighted, that capability of responding to visuals or questions has been elaborated on to give more detail about what that looks like for that individual learner. Oh, Kelly, I might just get you to have a look and see whose microphones might be on. I can just hear some other voices. If you don't mind checking that, that would be great if we could mute just at the moment. So here what we see is that real strengths-based approach in these two sections. When we think about writing from a strengths-based perspective, it's about acknowledging strengths and capabilities, but also recognising the supports and strategies that have enabled those capabilities to be demonstrated by the individual. So this section is where you will see those more specific details about strategies the teachers have used, the frequency of the support that has been provided, and what that looked like and enabled the child to do. So we see in this example that Anya has the capability of expressing her feelings. She does that with that explicit support of visual aids and social stories. The frequency of that is they're needed for that support's needed in moments where Anya feels a bit overwhelmed by noise, by activity levels, and by unexpected change. So you get a real sense of when Anya's going to need that support and what it might look like as a starting point for you. So there's greater depth in those strategies that we have provided space for our kindergarten teachers to share with you. So you will see in this example that there are 3 dot points around 3 strategies for support. Kindergarten teachers are not locked into, they're not committed to having to write 3. They make the decision for each child how much information should be shared. So you will get a minimum of 1 suggestion to support continuity of learning with a maximum of 3. I know somebody mentioned earlier on that they were really looking forward to learning more about those strategies, and with that shift this year to the dot points and specificity on strategies, I'd love to see a little thumbs up or reaction in the chat box from people about how they feel about that shift and that change to the transition statement in particular, to try and get to that specificity in detail and those shared practices that work for children. So we've had a chance to become familiar with the structure of our statement, what information will be in it, how you can locate that and what there is. Oh, thank you, Raquel. I was starting to get nervous. I appreciate that. So what we're going to do now is take what we've learned about that structure and the information that we find and think about what we might do with that. But before we jump into that, we had some people talking about how do we support our prep teachers, and part of that is in actually accessing and making sure people can get to transition statements. So let me do a quick refresh on how we can get to those transition statements. Now, each person who is accessing the portal needs their own individual login. You're only ever allowed to log in with your personal details, and those details go with you wherever you work. Now, in order to access transition statements, you need to have what is called the kindergarten viewer role. assigned to you by one of your administrators. So it would be a really great idea, a great support for administrators to be reviewing accounts and making sure the right people have that role assigned to them to get in and be able to access transition statements. So that's the first hurdle in getting to those statements, making sure the administrator has given you the correct role, the kindergarten viewer role. Once you have that, you'll see this tile under My Applications, the Kindergarten Transition Statement tile. When you click on that, it takes you to the home page and you can navigate through two places you will find your transition statements. The assigned statements list, which looks like what you can see on screen at the moment. What this is a list of statements that has been assigned to you by kindergarten services based on the consent that the parent carer has provided them. So it will only ever come to you in here if the parent has given consent for it to be shared. Now, this blue information box that's at the top of the page is really important, and it just reminds you of your responsibilities around accessing information. In there, it talks about if you see a child in your assigned statements list that isn't enrolled at your school, please delete that straight away. There have been some errors in assigning those statements. So if a child does turn up on your list, part of your requirement is just to delete that statement and remove it because you don't have the right to access it. It's only for those children enrolled in prep. Now, there's a really quick, easy way to download in bulk. This top section here on the filter line, you check the box that says select. It will highlight all of these statements that you haven't downloaded yet. Select them all, click download, and that will generate a zip file for you to be able to download and save to your files. Now, what we heard really clearly from prep teachers last year was it would be really helpful to be able to filter those statements from the ones that you've already downloaded and the ones that you have not yet downloaded. So you will see a new feature this year that's called the status filter. You'll see here any statements that you've already downloaded and viewed will be green. Any that you haven't viewed will have that blue not viewed, not downloaded. That gives you a really quick visual scan. What you can do then is filter the status by not viewed. It simply brings up all that have not been downloaded. You can select those and then download those. So that will do that each time any new statements are assigned to you. Thanks, Melissa. Great. Yeah, just trying to help with that efficiency and that workload, isn't it? That quick scan and the quick filter to go, these are the ones I need right now. What you'll also see as part of that, trying to help with efficiency and decision making about going in and accessing statements, is there will be a notification on that login page that lets you know when new statements have been assigned. That is in partner with an email that will go out each Monday. So anytime new statements are assigned, the kindergarten viewer, whoever has been assigned that role, will get an email notification as well to say new statements are waiting for you. That just helps you plan that time of when you'll go in and access them, so it's not a guessing game anymore. Now, in case a parent does not provide the name of the school their child is enrolled at the time of submission for our kindergarten teachers, they may not be able to assign it to you. But if one is available, you can do an individual search just using these 4 points of data. So if you have a child enrolled and they're not showing up in your assigned list, you can go through to do a search. The other thing you can do is have a conversation with the families about that transition statement and being able to share that with you. Okay, so I want to take us now, we've got that access story out of the way, and I'm pleased, thank you so much for the feedback on how you think that will benefit and help reduce workload for you. Let's jump back to Anya and really have a think about the information that's in a transition statement and how we might use it. So I will have information on screen, but if it's easier, you can use the example statement that I did email through to participants yesterday. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pause. I'm going to give you a moment to read the parent, carer and child perspectives that Anya's family have shared in this transition statement. As you're reading through, I want you to consider what it is you learn about Anya and her family, and where might you be able to use that information to support planning and preparation? Is that information helpful in building relationships with the child and the family? Does it help you with thinking about learning environments, your teaching and learning? How does it help you understand the individual learner? So some considerations there. Now, it's taken me a long time in a webinar to be comfortable with moments of silence. Please don't fear, nothing has happened to the sound. I am going to be quiet for about 2 minutes, just to give you time to read and consider the question. If you finish reading and you're ready to sort of move on and think about sharing your thoughts, give me a thumbs up through Menti and I will move on quicker. I just want to make sure I give you enough time to engage with the information. So if I can ask you now just to take a moment to read the information, think about Anya, and then we'll share in just a moment. Perfect. I did see some thumbs up come through, so I will just shift that on. And I want you in Mentimeter now to share some of your thinking about what it was you learned about Anya and what planning might that help you do. Build relationships, plan for learning environments. Give you a moment. And I promise we don't judge spelling when they come through in Mentimeter either. I know when I've engaged in them, trying to type quickly when I've put them up, I've realised there's about 10 spelling mistakes in it, so don't worry about that. Perfect. So we do get that sense with Anya, particularly about our environments, don't we, the families? What they value in learning environments are those spaces for Anya to move to, that agency for her to be able to regulate and make some choices to support her engagement. Lovely. So we can see that environment coming through again, particularly in those materials and resources she feels really comfortable with and is familiar with. Beautiful. And supporting those orientation and those visits, that almost sense of belonging straight up when she comes through. There's something familiar to connect with and a shared experience coming through. That at the moment there is, isn't it? Is that really narrow band of there's things that I'm very familiar with, very comfortable with, and I like to engage with. Building rapport. Excellent. Thank you. So lots of really rich information, even in that really short, concise piece. So let's move on and have a look at what the teacher's perspectives are on Anya. Those more holistic understandings of her engaging and participating in the kindergarten environment. I'm going to pause and give you another 2 minutes for quiet reading and thinking about what else it is you understand about Anya as a learner through the teacher perspectives. Again, thumbs up if you're ready to move on a bit quicker than I might be moving. Perfect. Let me jump on and share our thinking again. What else could we take away from those teacher perspectives? What might have been reaffirmed from those parent perspectives? What might be new? Perfect. And it links back to some of the comments that were made earlier around those parent perspectives and involvement as well. The kindergarten teacher has indicated here that collaborative decision making and working with families is something that regularly happens. So the families are really involved in decision making about Anya's learning and her engagement in the kindergarten environment. We also learn there's a real sensory element to Anya's learning. Beautiful, and that transitioning can be a challenge, and that those explicit supports, that consistency in educators, routines, or little rituals to help support with that transition could be really important. Well, a really lovely assessment. What a great statement. That greater depth in the learning interests, it sort of builds on what the family was saying and really highlights the importance of those relationships and building those relationships as part of a secure environment with trusted adults. And it's good to get that key information. So while there might be a diagnosis. In this case, there isn't a diagnosis. The teacher who came in and was writing this example for us, it's that idea of what are we seeing? How are we responding? What do we know? So that idea of the challenge might be in that sensory and that translation, and what are those steps we can take to support? And those multiple systems, wonderful. So lastly, I want us to take a look at communicating. I know it's always an area of real interest particularly for schools. Schools do talk to our kindergarten teachers, us about understanding that communicating area as one of the key pieces of information where it shares that language, literacy and numeracy development. I only give you quite a few moments to read this. Think about what we're learning about what Anya knows and can do, that strengths-based lens where we think about building on prior learning. We need to recognise a capability at a point and how that can be supported. So I'm going to just be quiet again for a few moments. Do let me know through thumbs up when you are ready to move on. Perfect. So thinking about what we know about what Anya knows and can do, we'll share some thinking now. And I know there's a lot to take in through that, and a lot of information and things that we can learn about Anya and Anya's learning and development in communicating, particularly in language and literacy and numeracy through that. Absolutely. There are communication strengths, particularly non-verbal communication strengths, in order to make herself understood and to really communicate those needs. Absolutely. Absolutely, and has a foundation. I think that there's that communication skill foundation to build on, particularly through the use of those and identification of some of those familiar strategies that help in building that language and vocabulary on top of her non-verbal communication skills. So things like pausing and just allowing your time to process thoughts and put that into words, modeling that language, but also expanding on language that Anya uses to keep hearing and being exposed to and practicing those words and that language. Yeah, that's reading and books. She has this real love of engagement and enjoys engagement with text, and particularly non-fiction, I think, comes through. And using that language from those texts that she engaged with, repeating language. And there is that real experimental foundational phase of her literacy and numeracy, and lots of explicit support and strategies in place to help her there. Wonderful. So if there was one thing you thought you might do for Anya, and if she was coming into your prep class, what might that be? as you're having a think about that and sharing it, I want to let you know that with those examples, we had kindergarten teachers come in and write the examples. They have all been de-identified from the individuals, names changed, all of that. But they are examples of teacher writing and children that these teachers are working with. And there are 4 examples we have on the website if you are interested in having a look at more of those. So linking back to those learning environments, resourcing and materials, thinking about the spaces we provide, some of those real sensory and calming places for regulation, engagement through books, those relationships and communication, meeting with families and collaborating. Lovely. Beautiful. This sense of extended. We know that transition doesn't just happen at this point of the year with a transition statement, that this is building on and adding to what you know and what you've already been doing, that it may take more time or more visits for this family to build that trust and relationship with the teacher. Absolutely. So some of that teaching and learning around those specific spaces and texts of interests to support Anya's engagement with text as well as that starting point for language interaction and making sense of her world. Wonderful. So we got some really strong starting points for Anya to build those relationships and come through and start building a sense of belonging and connection. I mentioned the transition statement examples that are on our kindergarten website if you're interested in finding those. In our Prep to Year 10, we have a suite of resources that can assist you with accessing those transition statements as well. So there are videos, a quick reference guide, help guides, particularly for our administrators on how to assign roles and manage those accounts so that you can get in and access these, but also guides on how to access a very comprehensive list of FAQs, which is a great first point of call if you do have any questions. We've been through a lot of information this afternoon. Thank you so much for your engagement and sharing that thinking as we looked at what transition and continuity of learning is, how we're bridging those approaches to support children as they start school, how we're using that information. Here are our contact details again. If you do need to reach out around anything, please do contact myself, Stacey, or Kelly at the QKLG inbox. We can help you with downloading transition statements. If you need specific support in access to the portal, Kelly has put the client services email in the chat box for you. They are our experts in all things getting access to the portal. So please do email them for that specific support. Now, I do surprisingly have a couple of minutes for those of you. Thank you, Eden. For those of you who know me, I do love to talk, and I'm surprised I've finished with 2 minutes spare. If you aren't rushing off this afternoon, you do have some questions that you would like us to try and answer in the next couple of minutes, please feel free to stay online. Pop your questions into Mentimeter. That helps us deal with them just one question at a time. But for anybody else who has joined us, if you don't have any questions, please feel free now to go and enjoy the rest of your afternoon. Stay nice and cool. Any questions, please do reach out. And thank you again for joining us this afternoon. Thank you, Raquel. I really appreciate that comment. We did consult very rigorously and widely with schools. You did let us know what works for you, so I'm really pleased that is coming across for you. Great, a question. So transition statements usually become available from early November. The kindergarten teachers are required to submit it and complete it in November. So for schools, they usually start becoming available from early November through to the end of November. Perfect. Okay, everybody. I think Kelly and I will start to wrap up and let you go and enjoy your afternoon. Thank you ever so much for joining us. We hope you have a lovely afternoon and reach out if there are any further questions. Have a great afternoon.